I know what GHB smells like. I know what it looks like when it's dissolved in Prosecco. I know what it does to a woman's central nervous system within 22 minutes of ingestion. The exact timeline varies by body weight, and I know mine. I'm a toxicology certified forensic nurse. I've testified in 4 criminal cases involving drug-facilitated assault. I've filled out the paperwork, bagged the evidence, and held someone's hand while they figured out what had been done to them. I was 31 years old on the afternoon of September 14th when I picked up my wedding flute and noticed it smelled wrong. That's the story, not the revenge. The story is that the woman who handed me that glass was the mother of the man I had just married. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet women keep the receipts and learn that the most dangerous person at any table is the one who already knows what's in the glass. If stories about dignity, documentation, and consequences are what bring you here, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's begin. I've spent 11 years working in hospital toxicology, first as a bedside nurse in an emergency department, then as a forensic nurse examiner. I do evidence collection for assault victims. I write chain of custody reports. I know, with clinical precision, exactly what it means when someone puts something in your drink without your knowledge. I don't need a lecture on definitions. I wrote training materials on those definitions. The phrase is drug-facilitated assault. 4 words. 2 of them do the work. The thing about my job is that it doesn't stay at the hospital. Comes home with you. You learn to read situations the way a radiologist reads a scan. You're trained to find the shadow that doesn't belong, and eventually you see shadows everywhere. My husband, Marcus, used to joke about it gently. He'd say I had a professional suspicion problem. He meant it warmly. He's not wrong. Marcus and I met when I was 26, introduced through a mutual colleague, on a Tuesday night over terrible hospital cafeteria coffee. He was a physical therapist. He was patient, methodical, the kind of person who explains things without condescension. He is genuinely good. I want to be precise about that because this story is not about him. He didn't know. And I need to say that clearly before anything else. His mother, Diane, was 63 that year. She ran her family the way a general runs a campaign. Strategic, total, and without a written record of the orders. She was the kind of woman who brought you a gift with one hand and kept score with the other. I recognized her immediately. I recognized most things. She didn't like me from the beginning. Not loudly. Diane didn't do loud. She did quiet displacement, the kind where you're never quite in the frame of the photo she takes of her son, the kind where she corrects your grammar at dinner but calls it helpful, the kind where she mentions twice that Marcus's college girlfriend was a dental hygienist, as if that were a credential that mattered. To her it was. To her, I was too direct, too clinical, too unavailable to be absorbed. She wanted a daughter-in-law she could manage. She got one who read lab reports for a living. I tried for 2 years to find the version of Diane who could be approached. I brought her flowers the first Thanksgiving. I called when she had her hip procedure. I read the book she recommended. Actually read it 60 pages in, before she mentioned she hadn't actually read it herself. I kept a mental ledger of those attempts the way you keep a running tab. At some point, you accept that the balance will never be cleared. You just decide whether you want to keep paying. I should have read that decision more clearly earlier. But love makes you want to believe in people who don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. The wedding was a Saturday, September 14th. We had 87 guests. A tent in the backyard of a rented property in the hill country, Edison lights, a string quartet Marcus had spent 3 months choosing. I had spent 14 months planning that day, not because I needed it to be perfect but because I wanted it to be deliberate. I wanted every element to be chosen. I'm specific about things. It's not a flaw. It is, as it turned out, what saved me. The reception began at 6. The toasts were at 6:45. I remember these times because I later needed to remember them. At 6:38 p.m., Marcus was pulled aside by his college roommate Derek, who wanted a photo near the bar. I was standing alone near the high-top table by the tent entrance. My champagne flute, the one engraved with the date, the one the florist had tied a ribbon around, was sitting in front of me. I had taken 1 sip. Maybe less. Diane appeared at 6:39. I know this because the wedding photographer, A methodical woman named Rosa who shoots in burst mode, captured her in 3 frames. Approaching, reaching, withdrawing. I did not know those photos existed until 3 weeks later. I only knew at 6:39 p.m. that my mother-in-law picked up my glass, turned slightly away from me, turned back and set it down. The turn was small. Anyone else would have called it nothing. A woman adjusting her grip. An involuntary movement. Meaningless. I'm trained to notice the movements people make when they think no one is watching. I've spent a decade in rooms where those movements matter. I noticed. I smiled at her. She smiled back. She said, "You look beautiful, sweetheart." She touched my arm. She moved toward the bar. I looked at the glass. I lifted it. I smelled it. The odor was faint. You would have to know what you were looking for. A very slight chemical sweetness beneath the Prosecco. Gamma hydroxybutyrate at a low concentration smells almost like nothing. Almost. To someone who has collected 14 urine samples from assaulted women who described their drinks as slightly off before they lost the next 4 hours. Almost nothing smells like everything. I set the glass down. I did not drink from it. My hands were flat on the table, very still. I did not leave the reception. I did not cry. I did not find Marcus. I picked up my clutch, removed the small square of cardstock I use as a lab label template. I keep them from habit, and I wrote the time, 6:41 p.m. I wrapped the flute carefully in 2 cocktail napkins and placed it in my clutch. Then I walked to the bar, asked for a fresh glass and went to find my husband. The toasts happened at 6:45. I raised my new glass. I smiled in every photograph. The reception ended at 11. We drove to the hotel at 11:22. Marcus was happy. He held my hand in the car. I held his back. I didn't tell him that night. I needed to know first. I called in a favor on Monday morning. I don't want to use names, so I'll say this. I know someone who runs a toxicology lab. She is not my friend in the casual sense. She is my colleague in the precise sense. The kind of colleague who understands chain of custody documentation and doesn't ask unnecessary questions when a woman calls her on a Monday morning and says she needs a rapid screen on a liquid sample collected under specific circumstances. I dropped the napkin-wrapped flute at her lab at 9:15 a.m. I had her results by Thursday afternoon. HB. 1.8 milligrams per milliliter. That concentration in a 150 milliliter flute would have delivered a sedating dose within 20 to 30 minutes. At my body weight, at that concentration, I would have been profoundly impaired within half an hour of ingestion. Confused. Unable to control my movements. Possibly unable to remember anything that followed. It was my wedding night. I sat in my car in the hospital parking structure and read the report twice. Then I read it a third time. Then I took a photograph of it with my phone and emailed the image to myself. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia. I've worked with her on forensic cases before. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need to tell you something, and then I need you to tell me what my options are." She was quiet for the 3 minutes it took me to explain. Then she said, "Don't speak to her. Don't confront her. Don't tell your husband yet. Send me the lab report." I sent it before she finished the sentence. I went home that evening. Marcus made pasta. I ate it. I answered his question about my day. I said, "The usual." I washed the dishes. I kept the lab report in a folder I labeled medical documentation, personal. I filed it in the accordion folder I keep in my home office. I put it behind my 2022 tax return, which is the least interesting item in any filing system. That folder was going to be the most interesting item in the room. Eventually, Patricia moved quickly. By the following Tuesday, she had documented the lab report, Rosa's photographs, which Rosa provided voluntarily, without question, when I explained what I was looking for, and a statement from me in the form of a detailed affidavit. 3 frames from Rosa's camera. Frame 1. Diane's right hand reaching toward the flute. Frame 2. Her body angled away, the flute partially obscured. Frame 3. The flute returned to the table, Diane's arm withdrawing. The timestamp in Rosa's metadata. 6:39 and 41 seconds p.m. 6:39 and 43 seconds p.m. 6:39 and 46 seconds p.m. 5 seconds. That's how long it takes to change what a day means. I looked at those photographs for a long time. I kept returning to frame 2, the one where her body was turned away, and you could just see the edge of her sleeve. She hadn't looked around first. She hadn't hesitated. That was the part that stayed with me. It was practiced. Or it was so certain of going unnoticed that it required no caution at all. Patricia called me that Wednesday evening. She walked me through the relevant statutes. Drug-facilitated assault. Poisoning. What could be proven, what would require a trial, what would resolve differently. She said I had strong grounds. She also said I had options that didn't involve immediate criminal filing, if I chose to exercise them a different way. I said, "Tell me about those options." She did. I thought about it for 1 week exactly. Marcus deserved to know. I told him on a Saturday morning, 14 days after the wedding. I made coffee first. I laid Rose's photographs on the kitchen table in order. 1, 2, 3. I placed the lab report beside them. I sat down. I said his name once and then I told him what had happened and what I had done about it. He didn't speak for a long time. He picked up frame 2 and held it. He set it down. He said, "Is this real?" Not disbelieving me. Asking the universe. I know the difference. I said, "The lab report is certified. The metadata is extracted from the original raw file. Patricia has copies of everything." He put his head in his hands. I let him be there for as long as he needed. He came back. He asked me what I wanted to do. I told him what Patricia had outlined. He didn't argue. He didn't defend his mother. He cried once quietly and then he said, "Tell me what you need from me." That was the moment I knew I had made the right decision about the person. Whatever happened after that, I had chosen correctly. If you've ever watched someone smile at you with a glass in their hand and only later understood what that smile was costing you, you know exactly where this is going. Stay with me. Diane called 2 days after our conversation with Patricia. She didn't know what we knew. She called to invite us to Sunday dinner. She said she had something she wanted to clear the air about. She said she'd been a little on edge at the wedding and wanted to apologize for being distant. I said, "Of course. We'll be there." Marcus looked at me across the kitchen. I held up one finger. Diane's household on Sundays meant her other son, Craig, who is 11 years older than Marcus and runs on the assumption that whatever is in the room belongs to him. Craig's wife, Linda, who has spent 2 decades perfecting the art of visible discomfort, and occasionally Diane's sister, Norma, who is the family's designated emotional witness, the one brought in when Diane needs an audience for a performance. Norma was there that Sunday. I noted her presence the way I note an unexpected lab value, with interest, not alarm. Diane had cooked. The table was set. She hugged me at the door. She smelled like the same perfume she wore at the wedding. I noticed that too. Dinner was procedural. Craig asked Marcus about work. Linda asked me about settling in. Norma watched everything, which is her function. Diane poured the wine herself. I held my glass and did not drink from it, and no one noticed. After dinner, as the dishes were being cleared, Craig leaned back in his chair and said, and I am quoting him because his words are worth preserving, "So we wanted to talk about the property on Millbrook Road." Millbrook Road was the property Diane's mother, Eleanor, had left when she passed 2 years prior. A 4-acre parcel, appraised at $380,000. It had been Eleanor's, and before that, Eleanor's parents'. There was family feeling attached to it. There was also $380,000 attached to it. Craig said, "We know Mom's been sorting through the estate, and we just want to make sure the family is aligned on keeping it in the family." Marcus said carefully, "What does that mean exactly?" Craig smiled the smile of a man who thinks a question is already answered. "It means it stays between the 4 of us. You, Marcus, me and Mom. Not." And here he paused, nodding in my direction, "complicated by outside considerations." Outside considerations. I set my wine glass down very gently. I said, "Craig, who is the named beneficiary on Eleanor's estate?" He blinked. Diane said quickly, "We're still sorting through the documents." I said, "because I'd hate for anyone to make plans around assets they haven't verified yet." Silence. I folded my napkin. I said, "We're going to head out. Thank you for dinner." I looked at Norma when I said it. In the car, Marcus said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm letting them have this week." I called Patricia the next morning. I said, "Send the letters." Patricia sent 3 letters. One to Diane, one to Craig, and one to the family attorney who had managed Eleanor's estate. The letters were brief. They named the lab report. They named the photographs. They named the statute. They named what we were prepared to do with those items, and what we were prepared not to do, contingent on a meeting. Craig called Marcus screaming. I know this because Marcus was in the kitchen when it happened and I could hear Craig's voice from across the room, though I could not make out his words. Marcus listened for 43 seconds. Then he said, "Call Patricia." He hung up. Diane called me directly. She did not scream. She cried. She said she didn't know what I was insinuating. She said the photos proved nothing. She said she would never. She used the word family 11 times in 4 minutes. I counted because I was writing notes. I said, "The meeting is Wednesday at Patricia's office at 2 p.m. I'll see you there." I ended the call. I put the phone down and stood at the kitchen window for a while. Then I went to my home office, opened the accordion folder, and moved the lab report to the front. Patricia's conference room is on the 4th floor of a building downtown. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and a table that seats 12. There were 7 of us. Diane, Craig, Linda, a family attorney named Harold who looked like he'd been awake since Friday, Patricia, Marcus, and me. I brought a folder. Diane had dressed formally, a blazer, a silk blouse. She had composed herself by then. The crying was finished. She sat at the table with her hands folded, and she looked at me with an expression I recognize from the families of perpetrators in the assault cases I've worked. The expression that is trying to determine whether the evidence is real before deciding which face to wear. Harold opened. He said the family wanted to address some misunderstandings and hoped this could be resolved without escalation. Craig said they felt the letters were threatening and legally aggressive. Diane said she was hurt. I let all of it land on the table. I waited for it to settle. Then I opened my folder. I said, "Can I share a few things?" Harold nodded. I placed Rose's 3 photographs on the table. I named each one. Timestamp 6 hours 39 minutes and 41 seconds. Timestamp 6 hours 39 minutes and 43 seconds. Timestamp 6 hours 39 minutes and 46 seconds. I said, "This is Diane at our wedding reception, at the table where my champagne flute was placed. This is her hand reaching toward it. This is her body position between the glass and the room. This is the glass being replaced." I placed the lab report beside the photographs. I said, "This is the result of a certified toxicology screen on the contents of that flute, conducted 48 hours later. HB, 1.8 milligrams per milliliter. That is a sedating dose at my body weight. I've worked 14 drug-facilitated assault cases. I know what that number means." No one spoke. Craig said, "That doesn't prove." "I haven't finished," I said. I removed a second document from the folder. It was a certified copy of Eleanor's will, which Patricia had obtained through the estate attorney's records. I set it on the table. I said, "Eleanor's estate named Marcus and Diane as co-beneficiaries of the Millbrook Road property. Not Craig. Not a family trust. Not an arrangement to be worked out among family. Marcus and Diane." I paused. "And under the terms of the will, if Diane were found legally incapacitated or convicted of a disqualifying criminal act prior to the estate's final distribution, which has not yet occurred, because Harold has been slow with the paperwork, her interest reverts to Marcus entirely." Harold's expression changed. I said, "I want to be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying Diane intended the property as a motive. I'm not saying anything about intent. I'm saying that as of this moment I have a certified lab report, 3 photographs with forensic metadata, a certified affidavit, and a statute that Patricia can walk you through. I'm saying that we can file what we have, or we can resolve this differently." Diane said, "You can't do this to our family." "Diane," I said, "you handed me that glass." The room was very quiet. Craig put his hand over his mouth. Linda looked at the window. Harold was writing. Diane's voice when it came was different from the crying version, different from the performance version. It was small. She said, "I only wanted," and then she stopped. I did not help her finish the sentence. "I waited," she said. "I thought if the night went a certain way Marcus would. I thought it would." She stopped again. I said, "I know what you thought." I removed the last item from my folder. It was a personal note, a card handwritten from Eleanor. Marcus and I had found it tucked inside a secondary envelope in Eleanor's estate papers, a note addressed to Marcus specifically, written in the months before she died. Patricia had included a copy in our documentation. I read one line. Only one. Eleanor had written, "A woman who keeps her own counsel is worth more than one who is easily managed. Don't let anyone manage her out of your life." I put the card back in the folder. I stood up. I said, "Patricia will follow up with Harold about the estate distribution. As for the other matter, I'm not filing today. What happens next depends on what happens next." Picked up my folder. Marcus stood beside me. He hadn't said a word the entire meeting. He didn't need to. Norma, who had not been invited but had come with Diane anyway and sat in the corner chair without speaking, Norma said quietly, "I'm sorry." To me. Not to the room. To me. I looked at her. I said, "I know." We walked out. The Millbrook Road property distributed to Marcus 6 weeks later. The estate finalized in November. Harold, it turned out, had been slow with the paperwork for reasons that became clear when Patricia reviewed his fee structure. But that is a different story and a smaller one. Marcus's share. The full property per the reversion clause. Appraised at $380,000. We have not sold it. We have not built on it. We have so far done nothing with it except drive out there twice, once in November, once in the spring, and stand at the edge of the tree line where Eleanor used to walk her dogs. It is very quiet out there. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything of you. Craig filed a challenge through Harold, which Patricia resolved in 2 weeks. I will not detail the resolution except to say it was complete. Craig and Linda have not been in contact since November. That is their choice and I don't have an opinion about it. Linda sent a card in December. No note inside, just her name signed. I put it in the folder. I don't know why. Seemed like the right place for it. Diane. I have not seen her. Marcus sees her occasionally, alone at her request. He tells me what he thinks I should know and nothing else. He is precise about what I need. I told you he was good. Norma sent me a message in October. She said she had known something was wrong that night, at the wedding, but that she hadn't understood what she was seeing. She said she had carried it for 3 weeks before our meeting, and that hearing the photographs described in that room had made her physically sick. She asked if there was anything she could do. I wrote back 3 sentences. I said, "You saw what you saw. That's enough. Take care of yourself." I meant all 3. The photographs, Rose's 3 frames, live in a separate folder on my encrypted drive. They are labeled with the timestamp metadata and the case reference number Patricia assigned. They are not displayed anywhere. They do not need to be. Evidence doesn't need to be on the wall to do its work. Eleanor's card is in the front of the accordion folder now. Behind it, the lab report. Behind that, the estate documents. I am a toxicology certified forensic nurse. I have spent 11 years understanding what it means when someone puts something in a drink without consent. I know what the paperwork looks like. I know what the evidence chain requires. I know how to hold a glass and smell it and set it down and go find my husband and not let anything show on my face until the time is right. Calm is not the same as passive. My mother-in-law had confused the two my entire marriage. Most people confuse the two when they look at quiet women. They see stillness and red surrender. They see the absence of noise and assume the absence of documentation. The thing about working in forensic medicine is that you never stop documenting. You learn very early that the story is always in the evidence, not in the speeches, not in the denials, not in the tears, in the chain of custody, in the timestamp, in the certified result. She handed me a glass. She thought I would drink it. She thought the night would go a certain way. She thought that what she could not manage she could simply sedate. I have held a lot of glasses in my life that were handed to me by people who wanted them to cost me something. I have put a lot of them down without drinking. That one I documented. The rest of them I'm still deciding about. If something in this story reminded you that the quietest person in the room is often the one who has already read the document, take that with you. Take it into whatever meeting, whatever dinner table, whatever relationship is asking you to drink something you didn't choose. You don't have to make a speech. You just have to know what's in the glass. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.